I rise today in support of S.J. Res. 26, a resolution to disapprove the Obama administration Department of Education's regulation on teacher preparation issues. This resolution is simple. It overturns the last administration's overreach into scores of state and territories, into thousands of college and university teacher preparation programs, and into millions of American classrooms. Last night, I drafted a fairly detailed statement on some of the problems deep inside this regulation, but I've decided to skip past most of that. Why? Because the problem with this regulation is actually much more basic than all of the substantive problems in the regulation. This regulation actually makes the assumption that bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. are competent to micromanage teacher training programs in America. That's what this regulation ultimately does, and that's absurd. So I would like to ask 3 questions of folks who plan to vote to defend this regulation. First, do you really think that bureaucrats in this city know better how to run teacher training programs than people who've spent most of their lives inside actual classrooms with actual future teachers and with students? How many of you have ever run a teacher training program? Has anyone in this body ever run a teacher training program? Because I have almost. I've spent a lot of my life around these programs. As a kid, my dad was a lifelong public school teacher and coach, and I've been in many of these classrooms with him when he was getting master's and continuing education programs. Then with my wife, who's also a public high school teacher. And then I was a college president at a university that had multiple teacher training programs. I know Keith Rohr, and I know the other deans of education that have been at Midland University and at many other colleges and universities across Nebraska. And yet, even though I've been around a lot of these programs in some detail, I wouldn't possibly think that I am ready to decree all the details inside those programs from thousands and thousands of miles away. Question number 2, has anyone actually read this regulation that folks are going to say they want to defend on this floor? Because I've been reading in it. I won't claim that I've read it, but I've read in it. This is the 695 pages of the regulation itself. There's actually a lot of guidance material as well, but I didn't bring them because I didn't want to have both of my hands occupied. This is the 695 pages of the regulation that we're talking about today. And it's actually really silly. If you read inside it, it is filled with enough specificity that if you tried to explain it to thoughtful, generally educated Americans, I submit to you that you would blush. There is a level of detail and a level of specificity in this that we are not possibly competent to defend at the micro level. And question number 3, can the folks who think that this is what Washington, D.C. ought to be doing right now, please show me somewhere in this document, this is the Senate version of the Constitution, show me somewhere in this document where we are given the specific authority to micromanage local programs like this from here. Because honestly, I mean this sincerely to my colleagues who plan to vote to defend this rule, I don't see how you can read this document and think that this is conceivably our job from here. We are not competent to do this. Now, a couple of qualifications are in order. Am I suggesting that all teacher training programs in America work well? Heavens no. There are some that are fairly strong, and there are actually a lot that are really, really poor and weak. But having a good intention to make them better is not the same as actually having accomplished something that will make them better. Good intentions are not enough. For us in this body to act, because we have compulsory governmental powers, we would need not merely good intentions, we would also need competence and authority. We have neither of those about teacher training programs. Everyone in this body agrees that education is darn near the center of the future of our country. We all want and we need good teachers. Most of us can remember specific teachers who stood out because of her or his creative presentation, because of their unexpected humor, because of their charm and their compassion, because of their tireless drive, because of their inspired mentorship. None of us in this chamber who have the privilege of serving our fellow countrymen and women regret or are unaware of the fact that the skills and the guidance and the abilities that we have are the function of the mentorship and the pedagogy of life-changing teachers from early in our lives. We have benefited from and we need good, prepared teachers. Now, if we all agree that teachers are critically important to our future, and since we all agree that teacher training programs are important, and we also agree that some of them aren't very good, the question would be, what would we do about that? What kind of debate should we have about why much education in America isn't good enough? Does anyone in this body sincerely believe that the big pressing problem in American education is that there aren't enough rules like this coming out of bureaucracies in Washington, D.C.? Because if you believe that, I would humbly suggest that you should go and meet with some of the ed school faculties back in your state and ask them if you can read them these 635 pages so you can tell them that we have the answers. Read it to them, and then please come back and tell us in this body that they agree with you, that what we really need is more 700-page regulations from Washington, D.C., micromanaging things as specific and local as teacher preparation programs. Oh, and one more thing, which is actually kind of big. This regulation explicitly violates the plain language and the congressional intent of the federal education law that was passed in this body last year. You'll all recall that the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was passed in this chamber with overwhelming bipartisan support last year. I think it got 83 votes. The act prohibits the Secretary of Education from prescribing, and here I quote, any aspect or parameter of a teacher, a principal, or other school leader evaluation system within any state or any local education agency, close quote, or, quote, indicators or specific measures of teacher, principal, or other school leadership, quality, or effectiveness, end quote. There's nothing ambiguous about this language. In addition, the Higher Education Act is clear that the levels of performance used by a state to assess teacher training programs, quote, shall be determined solely by the state, close quote. This rule overrides state authority over literally tens of thousands of discipline-specific teacher preparation programs across the nation, burdening states with a federally defined and expensive mandate. Under this regulation, states would be required to create elaborate new data systems that would link K-12 teacher data to evaluation data on teachers and administrators in particular schools, and then onto the data back into the teacher preparation programs. This regulation's goal would be to measure the success of teacher preparation based largely on teachers' students' subsequent test scores. It would need to all be backlinked in the data. This is data that is not currently gathered. Rube Goldberg is smiling somewhere, because this sounds like a bureaucrat's dream. A paperwork trail monitoring all the strengths and weaknesses of some vast machine, spitting out layers and layers of new data over which Washington's experts could then postulate and tinker. Again, I have no doubt that the bureaucrats who wrote these 700 eye-glazing pages, pages about rules, about data to be gathered that states are not currently gathering, I have no doubt that the people who wrote this mean well. I also have no doubt that the people who are going to defend this rule as somehow commonsensical, then why is it 700 pages, also mean well. But those good intentions don't change the fact that what they've actually done in this rule, what they've actually done is build a much larger requirement set of paper trails demanding further burdens on our teachers, on our principals, and on the professors who are teaching teachers, and then to require all of them to report back through new or expanded bureaucracies at the state level, though the states have not chosen to gather this data, and then to pass this data onto a bureaucracy a couple of blocks from here. These Rubik's Cubes of rules and data collection are not being done today, and supposedly we are going to make teacher preparation programs better by all of the specificity that comes from this rule. The fact that these regulations will likely cost states millions of dollars to implement simply adds insult to injury. Let's be honest. Education is not some vast, complex machine that just needs a little bit more tinkering from Washington-level intervention before it will be at utopia. It isn't true, and this rule is not an effective way to actually help the teachers who care so much that they're investing their lives in our kids. Nebraska's parents and educators and locally elected school boards are better equipped and better positioned to tackle the most important educational challenges. They're better equipped and they're better intentioned even than the smartest, the nicest, and the most well-meaning experts in Washington, D.C. And if you disagree, again, I humbly challenge you to go and try and read this rule to elementary and secondary school teachers in your state and to those who are running the programs that train them. Read the 695 pages to them and then report back to us that they actually share your view that the really big problem in American education is not enough 700-page rules from educational bureaucrats in D.C. Good intentions are not enough. Federal intervention and reforms should never make problems worse, and that is what this rule would do. I urge my colleagues to reject this rule and to rededicate ourselves to the duties that really and fundamentally are ours, to the duties that the federal government is exclusively and monopolistically empowered to carry out, because it isn't this. We are not competent to displace the expertise of the district and the state level, and we should not be trying to regulate teacher training programs from Washington, D.C. We are not competent to do this. Thank you for your consideration, and I yield back my time.